So Roman, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and let's start from scratch. What is the impact revolution?
The impact revolution is the ability for our whole economies to meet the challenges we face, the environmental and the social challenges, by optimizing not just risk and return, but risk, return, and impact. Today, our economies just try to make money. In the future, they have to be able to make money and to deliver positive impacts.
When we talk about the future, I don't know, you don't have a crystal ball, but more or less, how long do you think it will take?
I think the watershed for the impact revolution has been crossed now with the arrival of impact accounting. My prediction is that within the next decade, every company will be looking not just at its sales and its profits, but its sales, its profits, and its impacts. And consumers like you and me will be going into the supermarket with their phone, and they will be scanning the barcode of a product, and it will tell them whether it's good for them or bad for them, and what the alternatives are, but it will also tell them whether the company bringing it to the shelf is polluting the environment more than other suppliers, or following labor practices that involve child labor or other human rights abuses.
What technologies will be behind all this revolution?
AI and machine learning and big data are enabling this revolution to take place. I talked about the arrival of impact accounting now. We had the launch in New York on the 25th of September of impact accounting, basically turning impacts into value, into currency that you can compare with the profits of a company. We couldn't have done that without AI and machine learning and big data. At the same time, these new technologies are helping us to deliver impacts in ways we could never conceive of previously. So now in education or in health, you can help millions of people at the same time in a customized way, which we couldn't do with that technology. So really, the impact revolution is being driven by a change in values among consumers and investors who don't want to be involved with companies that create harm, leaps in technology that enable us to deliver impacts much more widely, much more powerfully than before, and leaps in impact measurement that enable us to measure the performance of a company, not just in terms of profit, but in terms of impact as well.
Is there an international standard to measure that impact?
So this is really the key point now. There are many efforts to create an international standard around the metrics of impact. For example, in the environmental area, tons of CO2, liters of water, and so on. Now we have kicked off the standardization of the valuation of these impacts. And so with the standardization coming to both of these, you will be able to rely on the information that you get. Today, there's a lot of pushback against ESG, greenwashing as it's called. In the next couple of years, it'll be impossible for a company to say that. Starting from now, if a company says, I have a great record in the impacts I deliver, and only mentions one, you will be able to measure all the other impacts that it has and compare them in monetary terms and say, no, you may be doing a good job on this one impact, but your total impact is hugely negative.
It is beautiful to be optimistic, but at the same time, one can feel that we are running out of time. So where do you see humanity right now?
People ask me, are you optimistic or pessimistic about this? I say I am determined. Humanity has to be determined. We have to be determined now to push these changes through as fast as we can. Now, the good news is that technology enables us to spread this data, this information now, without even requiring government action. Government action takes a very long time to achieve, and governments are also very concerned about creating opposition from the business community through greater impact transparency. But this new data, which is becoming available now on valuing impacts, for example, will come to everyone through the data providers, through the organizations that are selling this data to investors, to companies, and through apps, which sometimes are free, like Yuka, for consumers to use.
So we have like different players on the table. We have consumers, we have governments, we have entrepreneurs. What force do you think is the most powerful in order to accelerate the transformation?
Excellent question. So we started with consumers. Their change in values led to the $30 to $40 trillion of ESG, and that brought investors into the picture. The most important creators of impact, positive and negative, are companies. And investors are the ones who will bring the change in company behavior, not governments. Because when investors shift from a company that's polluting heavily to a competitor that pollutes less, they change the value of the two companies. And that is the biggest motivator for company management. So the key today is investors. Investors will also provide money to entrepreneurs who are often using new technologies to deliver superior impacts in education, in health, in clean energy, in finance, in every field. So I would say that investors and entrepreneurs are now the key force.
You know a lot about venture capital.
Yes.
And there's also a change going on there, but I don't know how widely spread is that change in that field. Is the industry of venture capitalists?
So it's very interesting that we have seen the greatest progress in the measurement of impact from investment among private equity firms, which are the cousin of venture capital. There are also now more than 25 funds of $1 billion or more that are private equity impact funds, and probably 100 in total that are impact and private equity. Why is this happening? Because the influence of investors on venture capitalists and private equity is a lot more direct. They put money into a fund and they say, we want you to measure the impacts. We want you to invest in companies that are delivering impact. When you invest in a big company, you don't have the ability to do that. You can turn up once a year at the annual general meeting and say what you want. And so that's why we are seeing private equity and venture capital actually leading now in having proper impact investing, which is the intention to create impact, but also the rigorous measurement of the impact created.
Do you think entrepreneurs in the future will refuse to work with funds that are not following those values?
We are beginning to see that now. We begin to see a preference for impact funds. I'm involved with the Apex Impact Fund, but I also invest personally in impact ventures. And I see entrepreneurs expressing a preference for bringing people on side who understand risk-return impact and not just risk-return, because it's a different way of thinking. when you begin to think in terms of risk-return impact, you look at your product line and you say, does it deliver the best impact on health, for example? Let's say it's a food product. Does it have too much sugar in it? Should I improve my product line? When you think of risk-return only, you don't take into consideration the fact that if you improve your impact, your sales will improve, because that's what consumers want. So it's a different way of thinking. And that creates preferences among entrepreneurs. And the future is obviously to optimize risk-return impact. If you ignore impact, with the transparency that's coming, you will be taxed more, consumers won't buy your product, and you won't be able to attract the right talent. So it's not the way to succeed as an entrepreneur.
We have one planet, but we have approximately 200 countries with different cultures.
Yeah.
Is it possible to sit around the same table, for instance, the US and China, about these issues, these topics?
So I think it's easier for markets to pick it up than it is for governments to agree. And it's very interesting that if you see what India and China, for example, are doing in the area of clean vehicles, they're doing far more than the developed world, China in particular. And not just in clean vehicles, but solar panels and so on. They've actually set in China an objective to be the leader in providing clean energy. To get governments to agree is very difficult. But consumers who need these clean products will give a competitive advantage to China. That will create pressures on other governments to follow.
Do we need people like you, well known in the international environment, to play the role of kind of the bridge between different cultures?
We do, because there is a general perception in business today that they have to prevent this transparency from taking place. Companies don't want bad impacts to be exposed. We have to get the business world to understand that this is the future for them. It's a disruption, just as the disruption that came from the microchip. This disruption, which comes from AI and impact together, is going to be as pervasive and as important. And so businesses need to take this seriously. And so having people who have been in the world of business and investment actually giving their support to this is very important. There are probably about 100 thought leaders leading big companies who are already measuring impacts and valuing some of them, But it's not enough. We needed to create a broader base of support for these ideas.
You've said several times before that times of profit only are over. Can you please develop a little bit more?
Yeah,
this
I mean,
thought?
I'll give you a very simple example, which is an indicator of what's going to happen in the future. You can no longer profitably invest in coal mines, right? 10, 15 years ago, people were investing in coal mines hoping to make great profits out of them and so on. Why? Because they're such heavy polluters that everybody came to the conclusion they were going to lose money by putting their capital into them. This is going to happen sector by sector. In the construction industry, you're going to have new substitutes for cement. In the steel industry, you're going to have greener steel. In the packaging industry, you're going to have biodegradable packaging. In the food industry, you're going to have low sugar products that are better for your health. In the motor industry, you're going to have vehicles that pollute less. In the battery industry for vehicles, you're going to have batteries whose manufacturer pollutes less. This is a mega trend now. And so you have to be very foolish today to ignore impact and to run your business as if consumer preferences and government preferences and investor preferences hadn't changed. You're like the people who at the time of the tech revolution, when I started out in the venture capital industry, thought the microchip was going to transform the computer industry and nothing else.
Do you think the biggest companies have to be closer to startups? Is that a need in order to thrive?
I think in these new areas of impact, just as in the new areas of technology, big companies have realized that they are not the best place to innovate, and therefore that they have to keep acquiring companies that achieve innovation. That's become part of the ecosystem today in the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, it's very widespread. Whether some big companies now begin to get the innovation gene, to spread faster than they have previously is a question. I personally believe that innovation has to do with not thinking about what made you successful in the past, only thinking about what's going to make you successful in the future. That's easier for an entrepreneur starting out, obviously, than it is for a big, successful company.
Thank you very much for being here, Sir Roland.
Pleasure to speak with you.